The boy is 17 years old. His brothers have stripped the coat from his back. That coat, the one his father Jacob stitched his favoritism into with every thread, and they have thrown him into a pit. Not a prison, not a cell with walls and iron, a pit. A dry cistern cut into limestone 20 feet deep, with nothing at the bottom but darkness and the smell of old rock. And 17-year-old Joseph sits down there, listening to his brothers eat their midday meal above him. He can hear their voices. He can hear them laugh. Josephus, the Jewish historian writing in the 1st century, records that the pit was waterless and that the darkness inside was total. You can imagine what that sounds like. Laughter drifting down through 20 feet of stone. And from down in the dark, Joseph cannot see what you and I can see from here, that this hole in the ground in the middle of the Canaan desert is the beginning of everything. This is where we start, not in a palace, not at a pulpit, in a pit now. Before we go any further, I need you to hear something clearly. This is not a story about Joseph. This is not a story about suffering. It is not a story about patience. It is not even a story about prison. This is a story about a pattern so consistent, so deliberate, so unmistakable across 1,500 years of scripture that once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. Every major servant of God in this Bible spent time in confinement before the most important work of their life began. Not some of them, not most of them, every single one. Joseph in the pit, Samson in the grinding house, Jeremiah in the cistern, Peter in Herod's dungeon, Paul in the Philippian jail, John on a volcanic island 30 miles off the coast of what we now call Turkey. 6 people, 6 prisons, one pattern running like a thread of iron through the whole of Scripture. And before we get to each of them, I want you to hold one question in the back of your mind as we go. At the end of this video, I am going to tell you something about how each of them got out of their confinement, because the answer is the same in every single case, and it is not what you think. We will come back to that, but not yet. Let's start with Joseph, and I want you to see him, not as the flannel board figure from Sunday school, not as the boy in the musical, but as an actual human being in an impossible situation. He is a teenager. He has never done a day of hard labor in his life. His father kept him close, gave him the coat that marked him out, sent him on errands while his older brothers broke their backs in the fields. He is young and naive, and he does not fully understand why his brother's eyes go flat and cold every time he walks into a room. Then one day his father sends him to check on his brothers in Dothan, a journey of 60 miles on foot. He makes the walk, he finds them, and before he can say a word, they grab him. They throw him in the pit, they sit down to eat. And then an Ishmaelite caravan crests the ridge, and his brother Judah looks at the caravan and back at the pit and says the words that will haunt this family for 2 generations. What profit is it if we kill our brother? Let us sell him 20 pieces of silver. Joseph is pulled out of the pit and handed to strangers and taken south toward Egypt, toward a country he has never seen, speaking a language he does not know, toward a life he never asked for. And then it gets worse. In Egypt, after he has survived the journey, after he has been purchased by a man named Potiphar, a high official in Pharaoh's court, after he has managed to rebuild something of a life in a foreign country, Potiphar's wife lies about him. And Potiphar, who probably suspects the truth, throws Joseph in prison anyway. Because what else can a powerful man do? The actual prison this time, not the pit. Iron bars. Other prisoners. The smell of men who have been here long enough to stop counting days. Genesis chapter 40 tells us he was there for years. We know from the narrative that at least 2 full years passed after the cupbearer walked out of prison and forgot Joseph's name. 2 years of faithful, invisible, unrewarded waiting in a foreign cell, before Pharaoh had a dream nobody could explain. Here's what most people miss about those 2 years. Joseph had done nothing wrong in Egypt. He had served faithfully. He had resisted a temptation that most people would have failed. He had acted with integrity when no one was watching. And God let him sit in that cell for 2 more years after the one man who could free him walked out the door and forgot he existed. 2 years, faithful, overlooked, unrewarded. What do you do with that? We will come back to it. Now let us move forward about 300 years, to a man with a very different kind of failure behind him. Samson was a Nazirite from birth, set apart before he was born, consecrated to God, his covenant marked in his uncut hair. And he had spent his adult life trading that covenant for whatever he wanted in the moment. You know the shape of the story, Delilah. The slow, patient wearing down of a man who thought his gift was indestructible. 3 false answers, and then the truth, and then sleep. Judges chapter 16 verse 20 says something that should stop you cold. He did not know that the Lord had left him. He didn't know. He woke up. He shook himself the way he always had. He thought the strength was there, and it was gone. And he didn't know it was gone until the Philistines were already on him. They blinded him. They put him in bronze shackles. And they sent him to the prison in Gaza and set him to work at the grinding mill, the labor of the lowest servants, of animals, of people with nowhere left to fall, the champion of Israel, grinding grain in the dark. And this is where it gets remarkable. Because in that darkness, in that place of humiliation, in the prison that looked like the end of Samson's story, the text offers one quiet sentence that you could miss if you are moving too fast. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. One sentence. Pay attention to this. The confinement that looked like God's abandonment was actually God's preparation. The darkness was not the absence of God's attention. It was the place where something necessary could grow back without interference. 3,000 Philistines, more than Samson killed in his entire career combined, died because of what happened in that prison. Not in spite of the prison, because of it. Now let us go forward another 400 years. To a man who did not deserve his prison at all. Jeremiah was a prophet. For 40 years he had done one thing, told the truth. He wept over a nation walking toward its own destruction. He wrote his grief in poems so raw they are still read in hospital rooms today. He had never wanted the calling. He told God early on, I do not know how to speak. I am only a child, and God said, you will go where I send you. So he went, he spoke, and no one listened. And then the court officials came for him. The city was already under siege by Babylon. They accused him of demoralizing the troops with his prophecies, which was another way of saying, the truth is inconvenient right now. They lowered him by ropes into the cistern of Malchiah. The word in Hebrew is bore, the same word used for Joseph's pit, a hollow place. A dry well cut into the earth, there was no water in it, only mud, and Jeremiah sank in the mud. His name in Hebrew, Yirmeyahu, means the Lord lifts up, and there he was, sinking. Here's the part nobody tells you. The man who rescued him was not a priest, not a soldier, not a prophet. His name was Ebed-melech, an Ethiopian eunuch, a foreign palace servant with no religious standing, no political power, no obligation to Jeremiah, no personal stake in the outcome. He went to King Zedekiah. He argued for Jeremiah's life with a directness that is almost shocking. He looked the frightened king in the face and said, plainly, these men have done evil in all they have done to Jeremiah the prophet. Not hedging, not diplomatic, just the truth spoken to a man with the power to have him killed. He got permission. He gathered 30 men. And then he went to the palace storeroom and collected old rags and worn-out clothes. And he sent them down into the pit first, before the ropes, so the ropes would not cut into Jeremiah's arms when they pulled him up. Old rags for the prophet in the mud. God did not use the temple establishment to rescue his prophet. He used a forgotten foreign servant with a pile of worn-out clothes. And that matters more than you might realize right now. We are going to come back to why. We are about halfway through, and I want to pause for just a moment. If this video is opening up these stories for you, if you are connecting Joseph's pit or Jeremiah's cistern to something in your own life, take 30 seconds right now and subscribe if you have not already. And leave me a comment below. Which of these 3 so far speaks most directly to where you are right now? Because Peter, Paul, and John are still ahead. And the pattern we have been building is about to come into very sharp focus. Here is what I want you to carry into the second half. Joseph, Samson, and Jeremiah all walked out of their confinement. Every one of them. and not one of them got themselves out. Let us keep going. The night before Peter was scheduled to die, he was asleep. I need you to sit with that for a second. James, the brother of John, had already been executed by Herod's sword. The execution was public, and it was popular, and Herod understood crowds. So he arrested Peter next, and planned to bring him out after Passover for maximum visibility. Peter was in the inner cell, 4 squads of soldiers, 16 guards rotating through the night. He was bound with 2 chains, one connecting him to a soldier on his left, one to a soldier on his right, with 2 more guards posted at the outer door. This is not standard issue security. This is the kind of security you build when you are afraid of something you cannot quite name. And Peter was asleep, not performing peace, not white-knuckling through anxiety. Asleep, the deep, ordinary sleep of a man who had released something he could not control. The church was gathered at the house of Mary, the mother of John Mark. They were praying. The Greek word is ektonos, stretched out, strained, the way a muscle strains at the edge of its capacity. They had been at it all night, praying hard for a miracle, and the angel came. He struck Peter on the side to wake him. Let that land. A man on death row in the inner cell of a high-security prison, chained to 2 soldiers, had to be struck on the side to wake up. The chains fell off his wrists. The angels told him, "Put on your sandals, wrap your cloak, follow me." They walked past the first guard post, past the second, and the iron gate leading into the city. The text says it opened by itself, on its own. Peter walked out into a Jerusalem street and stood in the cool night air. And the text says he did not know that what was happening with the angel was real. He thought he was seeing a vision. He had to walk 2 blocks and feel the night air on his face before he understood. This is real. I am actually free. Now watch what happens next. He goes to the house of Mary, the very house where the church is gathered right now praying at this exact moment for this exact outcome. He knocks on the outer gate. A servant girl named Rhoda comes to answer. She hears his voice, and she is so overwhelmed with joy and disbelief that she runs back inside to tell the others, and leaves Peter standing in the street. The people who have been praying all night for Peter's release tell Rhoda she must be out of her mind. It is his angel, they say, because that is easier to believe than the actual answer being there at the door, waiting. God's answer to prayer sometimes arrives before our faith has caught up to it, and sometimes the miracle is standing outside the gate, knocking, while we argue inside about whether miracles are still possible. Now come with me to Philippi, to what may be the strangest moment in all of Acts. Paul and Silas had been beaten, not a warning. The magistrates tore their clothes and had them flogged with rods, the kind of punishment that leaves a man unable to straighten his back for days. Then they were thrown into the inner cell, the deepest part of the prison, and their feet were locked in wooden stocks. It is midnight, and Paul and Silas were singing. The Greek is hymnos, hymns, not quiet, private prayers whispered into the dark. Songs, the kind that carried through stone walls and iron bars, the kind the other prisoners could hear from their cells. And the other prisoners were listening. And then the earthquake came. The foundation shook. Every door in the prison flew open. Every chain fell loose from every prisoner in the building. The jailer woke up. He saw the open doors. He drew his sword. In the Roman world, if a prisoner escaped on your watch, you paid with your life. The jailer knew this. He had already decided better to die by his own hand than face the magistrates. And out of the dark, Paul's voice came to him. "Do not harm yourself. We are all here." They stayed. Every prisoner, every one of them stayed. You need to understand what that cost. Every door was open. Every chain was on the floor. The jailer was about to die anyway. The night was dark, and Philippi had roads going in every direction. Paul was a Roman citizen who had been beaten illegally. He had every justification to walk out that gate. They stayed. And the jailer, the man who had locked their feet in stocks just hours before, fell on his knees in front of them and asked the question that has been repeated in one form or another for 2,000 years. What must I do to be saved? His whole household was baptized before dawn. Here's what most people miss about Philippi. The earthquake did not happen so Paul and Silas could escape. They did not escape. The earthquake happened because God needed one man, a Roman government employee who locked people in stocks for a living, to ask one question. The prison was not the obstacle to the mission. The prison was the mission. Now we come to the last man, and in some ways the hardest story to sit with. His name was John. He was called the beloved disciple. At the Last Supper, he was the one who leaned against Jesus. At the cross, when the others had scattered, he was the one who stayed. At the empty tomb, he was the one who looked in and believed before he fully understood what he was seeing. And by the time we find him on the island of Patmos, he is the only one left. Peter, crucified upside down outside Rome by his own request because he said he was not worthy to die in the same position as his Lord. Paul, beheaded on the Ostian Way under Nero. James, the son of Zebedee, the first of the 12 to die, the sword of Herod, Matthew. Thomas, who traveled east as far as India, Bartholomew, Thaddeus, Andrew. One by one, the men he had walked with, eaten with, argued with, laughed with for 3 years, gone. John alone remained. Eusebius, writing in the 4th century, records that under Emperor Domitian, around AD 95, John was brought to Rome to stand trial. Tertullian, writing earlier still, says he was thrown into a vat of boiling oil at the Porta Latina in front of the Roman crowds, and he walked out unharmed, so they sent him to an island instead, Patmos, 37 square miles of volcanic rock in the Aegean Sea. The Romans used it as a penal colony, a place for political prisoners who were too dangerous to execute publicly and too persistent to simply ignore. You put them on a rock in the ocean, and you wait for them to become irrelevant. John was in his 90s. He had buried everyone he loved. By every human measure, he was finished. And on that island, on a Sunday morning, in a state of prayer he describes as being in the Spirit, he heard a voice behind him, like a trumpet. When he turned, he saw the risen Christ standing among 7 golden lampstands, his face like the sun shining at full strength, his eyes like flames, his voice like the sound of many waters. And John, who had known this man, who had touched him and eaten with him and heard his actual voice say, "Peace be with you," in a locked upper room, fell on his face like a dead man. The hand touched him. "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one." And from that island, from that penal colony, from that rock where an old man had been sent to die quietly, came the book of Revelation, 22 chapters. The most studied, debated, preached, and argued over document in 2,000 years of Christian history, written by an old man on a rock in the middle of the sea because his enemies thought isolation was the same as silence. They were wrong. Now, I promised you something at the beginning of this video. I told you to pay attention to how each of these people got out. The answer, I said, was the same every time. Here it is. Not one of them got themselves out. Joseph did not escape. He was summoned by Pharaoh after a dream nobody could interpret, and only after a cupbearer finally remembered a conversation 2 years old. Someone on the outside had to remember his name. Samson did not break his chains. He prayed one prayer, one of the most honest prayers in the book of Judges. "O Lord God, please remember me just this once more." That is the whole prayer. And the pillars came down because someone answered from outside that grinding house. Jeremiah did not climb out of the cistern. A foreign servant with 30 men and a pile of old rags pulled him out. He didn't plan it. He didn't arrange it. He was sinking in the mud when the ropes came down from above. Peter did not pick his locks. An angel struck him on the side while he was sleeping and walked him out past 16 soldiers and an iron gate that opened by itself. He thought he was dreaming. Paul and Silas did not cause the earthquake. They sang until the ground shook, and then they waited to see what God would do with the open door. And John never left Patmos. He was never freed. He died there, old and exiled. And yet the words he wrote from that exile are read aloud in churches every single Sunday of the year. The prison became the platform. I am not going to tell you your season ends soon. I am not going to give you a formula for getting out faster. And I am not going to pretend that Patmos felt like a gift to John when he first set foot on that volcanic island, old and alone and the last one left. But I need you to hear this, really hear it, not just let it pass through. The door has never opened from the inside. Not once. Not in a single story across 1,500 years of scripture. The door that opens from outside. God sends the angel. God shakes the foundation. God remembers the name of the boy at the bottom of the pit. God moves the heart of a forgotten palace servant to gather old rags and argue with a frightened king. You cannot earthquake yourself free. You cannot angel yourself out. But here is what every one of these 6 people did, each in their own way. They stayed faithful in the dark. Joseph kept his integrity in Potiphar's prison when no one was watching. Samson let his hair grow back in the grinding house. Jeremiah kept speaking the truth even from the mud. Peter slept in his chains. Paul and Silas sang at midnight. John turned around when he heard the voice. And maybe this is for someone watching today who is sitting at the bottom of something. Not a literal prison, but you know what your prison looks like. Maybe it is a marriage that has gone gray and silent, where you have both stopped reaching for each other, and you do not know how to find your way back. Maybe it is the career that died and took a piece of your identity with it, and you are starting over in a way you never planned for. Maybe it is a diagnosis that rewrote everything you thought the next decade would look like. Maybe it is grief that has put glass between you and the life you used to live, and you smile fine on the outside, but inside you are still sinking in the mud at the bottom of the cistern. Maybe you have been there for 2 years, maybe longer. Maybe the person who was supposed to remember you moved on a long time ago, and you can still hear them eating lunch up above. I cannot tell you the door opens tomorrow. I do not know that. But I can tell you this with everything in these stories. In not one of these 6 accounts did the confinement have the last word. Not once. And in not one of these 6 stories did the person inside open the door themselves. Someone has been standing outside yours this whole time. Let me leave you with 3 things. First, the confinement is not a contradiction of the calling. It is part of it. Joseph could not have stood in Pharaoh's court without the prison, because the prison was the place where he met the cupbearer who would eventually speak his name to the most powerful ruler in the world. Samson's greatest act happened because the grinding house broke his pride and gave his hair time to grow back. John's greatest writing came from an island where he had nothing left to protect and nowhere to go but deeper into the presence of God. The prison was not interrupting the plan. In every case, every single one, the prison was the plan. Second, your stuck season is not evidence that God has forgotten you. It may be the last thing he does before he moves. Joseph sat in that cell for 2 full years after the cupbearer forgot him. 2 years of waking up in the same place, doing the same labor, watching the same walls. And then one morning, one dream, one conversation in a palace, and he went from the prison floor to the second most powerful position in Egypt before the sun went down. The upgrade took a single conversation. The waiting took 13 years. Do not mistake the length of the waiting for the silence of God. And third, this is the one I want you to actually carry with you when you leave this video. The door has never opened from the inside. Not Joseph's, not Samson's, not Jeremiah's. Not Peter's or Paul's or the old man's on the volcanic island in the Aegean Sea. The door that opens from the outside always, by someone who has not forgotten, who has not moved on, who still knows the name of the boy at the bottom of the pit, who knows yours. Before I go, I have one question for you, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments below. Which of these 6, Joseph, Samson, Jeremiah, Peter, Paul, or John, feels most like your story right now? Which of these prisons looks most like the season you are in? Tell me. I read every single comment. And if something in this video helped you see these old stories differently today, if you are leaving with a different understanding of what might be happening in a season that feels like confinement, please subscribe. Because every week we come back to these ancient accounts and find out they are not ancient at all. They were written about real people who felt exactly what you feel. Every one of them eventually changed the world. I will see you in the next one.